Welcome to another broadcast of Discovering Eric Butterworth on Unity Online Radio. I am Tom Thorpe, the program's host, and with me is co-host Reverend Michael Madej, whom you all know by now as a wonderful minister, teacher, expert on world religion, spiritual practitioner, and all-around nice guy. Hi, Michael.
Hey, Tom.
And thank you for picking such wonderful audio excerpts today. We are in the second week of a 7-week series discussing Charles Fillmore. And I realize that there are some who'd be listening to this program who would ask, who is Charles Fillmore? Charles Fillmore is the co-founder with his wife, Myrtle Fillmore, of the Unity Movement, founded in 1889. Their energies work together to provide, or to produce, rather, a lasting spiritual movement, whereas many others during that day and time were producing spiritual movements that did not have that kind of staying power. Charles Fillmore was one of Eric Butterworth's major teachers. And Michael, what was your response when you were first exposed to Fillmore?
My first exposure to Fillmore was, oh my, I don't get him. He's kind of hard to understand.
Yeah, me too. And I realized later on, as I came to know and love Charles Fillmore, that he was a self-educated man, an autodidact, as we would call him today. Mm-hmm. And he valued education. I mean, he treasured it like a connoisseur of wine would treasure a really rare wine, and he rejoiced in it. Most of his writing, I also discovered, was transcripts of talks that he had produced. And you know how we are when we speak. We don't necessarily follow a straight path. We do take some side trails and then come back sort of to what we were talking about in the first place. And some of Charles Fillmore's writing is like that. Now, when you can get past that, the man was way ahead of his time.
Yeah.
An amazing thinker. And some of what he said we wouldn't agree with, but I wouldn't agree 100% with anybody that I've ever read. And you've chosen a lot of beautiful information. So why don't we just get started with number one, Jeff, which is Prove Me Now.
So often a movement begins with the ideas of a person, and then there is the thought that this was a specific revelation to this person, and therefore the idea of revelation usually means that it's all closed, it's final. There are a number of movements that have crystallized on this basis. But you see, Charles Fillmore left no dogma or creed that students must accept, and nor is anyone involved in Unity asked to accept or believe anything that he cannot logically demonstrate to be true. Fillmore often quoted the statement from Malachi, the 3rd chapter, "Prove me now, saith the Lord of hosts, if I will not open you the windows of heaven and pour you out a blessing that you will not have room enough to receive it." This was sort of his theme song. He was, as we said last week, he was sort of a pioneer and a researcher and a very practical mind, and he felt that if a thing was true, it should stand the testing of the thing. And he felt that every student should test a truth and not just accept it, not just accept a doctrine or a dogma. Quoting from Fillmore, he says, "In reviving in this age the pure doctrine of Jesus Christ, we find that he was not the only one who advocated salvation from sin, sickness, and death by right thinking, but that his methods are paralleled by the avatars and teachers of nearly every nation of which history reports. Hence we are safe in claiming that we're dealing with an exact science that is susceptible of universal demonstration, and that when applied with the same faithfulness that man gives to his daily affairs, it will do all that is claimed for it." In other words, what he's saying is that truth, no matter how it may be defined or described or organizationally identified, truth is not the property of any particular race or any chosen people, but is given freely to all who open their understanding to that one divine mind, with which the only real wisdom and life and love ever come. And you note here also that he is stating that truth is not just essentially that which came through Jesus, but that Jesus demonstrated truth which is universal. And therefore, obviously, this indicates, as he has said, that this truth, if it is demonstrable and right and universal, not only can be but has been demonstrated and taught by other races and other cultures and other religious teachers and masters. He says, it is not reasonable to suppose that a just and impartial Creator would manifest himself to one nation or to one man, or make either of them the specific custodian of his word. No, the God we worship is a universal principle, the one principle of life, and by or through it comes all the life and intelligence that we have.
Okay.
Pretty amazing.
It is pretty amazing.
Pretty unique and compelling.
Yeah, yeah. And Eric, being the student of Charles Fillmore that he was, he can get right to the essential in a way that few people can, because there's a lot in Fillmore. I think it's sort of like peeling a coconut. Have you ever peeled a coconut?
No.
I've tried once, didn't get too far. Because a coconut's outer shell, you see people from tropical places peeling them with machetes, and you really need one. I tried a screwdriver and a hammer and spent most of the afternoon feeling like an idiot. But it's very, very interesting how that works. I think we should just get right on to the next one, which is eradicating false conceptions.
We're going to be dealing with his ideals on healing in a later time, but for now I think it's important to note that he says metaphysics treats of healing by an understanding of the reality of things. It does not, in its exact meaning, teach how to heal diseases by the power of thought, but it teaches how, by the power of thought, false conceptions may be eradicated and the divine reality brought into manifestation, showing forth in health and harmony. Now, this is a very subtle and yet a very important concept of Charles Fillmore, that the principle of truth, as we say, which certainly deals with the healing process, does not teach how to heal disease by the power of thought, but it teaches that by the power of thought, the false conceptions can be eradicated, the confusions in consciousness, the stress in the physical system can be eliminated, so that the divine reality may be brought into manifestation, showing forth in health and harmony. That's a very important key to demonstration, you see, so that we're not creating healing by speaking the word of truth or by treating conditions, but that what we're really doing is changing thought, and the thought itself has been that which has been inhibiting the healing, but the healing is natural. And of course, this puts mind into a different perspective than is normally given. Healing does not begin in mental treatment. Treatment simply opens the eyes and releases the wholeness which already is.
That to me is, well, we've talked about this a number of times, how this has been so important in my life. Wholeness is our natural state. Mm-hmm. What appears to be a lack of wholeness really is the result of some error conditions of one kind or another. Strictly speaking, there is no healing except a return to the awareness of the wholeness which in the spiritual realm never left. Now, I know that sounds confusing to a lot of people. Yeah, your body may be sick, but you, the essence of you, the image and likeness of God that you are, that cannot be sick.
Yeah, it's really, I agree with you. It's extremely important, even if it is subtle in one respect. But it all kind of depends upon an understanding of who we think we are.
Yeah, yeah.
If we're going to insist that we are the separate being, separate physical being who is suffering in the world, then we're not going to understand this point.
That's right. We couldn't possibly understand this point, and it would likely make us angry.
It sounds like magic or something.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But if we can get beyond that to the deeper understanding of our true nature, which is wholeness, then this begins to make sense.
Yeah. What we do, essentially, what I did, was to let the wholeness express. In the absolute, in the spiritual realm, it never wasn't expressing for a variety of reasons. Some of them having to do with me and some of them having to do with things that I could not consciously control. It wasn't expressing. My work was to remove the blockages and let the natural wholeness express.
But Tom, I have not seen this taught very well. in my experience,
Yeah.
in my own classrooms that I've sat in. I don't think too many people really understand this point, even though it is a crucial, pivotal, central point.
I wonder if maybe you have to have an experience in your own life before you really will.
Maybe so.
I don't know. But I'm trying to teach it that way.
Me too.
And I'm also looking to take away the blame from the manifestation of illness. You know, a lot of people think about that as a report card with a big red F on it. Cancer, oh my God, I must be a terrible truth student.
Yeah.
The fact is you're not. What happens in our relative experience happens. Why it happened is not the question now. How we respond to it is the question now. Am I going to look for the truth here, or am I going to sink deeper and deeper into a sense of separation? That's the real question. So I've had people in ministries that I've served not want me to know when they weren't feeling well because they were afraid that I would think ill of them. And how do you think I felt when I was sick back before I figured out who I was? You know, I have to come up to a Unity congregation on Sunday, and I've got the mother of all head colds, and I'm speaking about healing that day, wouldn't you know? That offers you a wonderful opportunity. But, you know, it's a question of just accepting the circumstances as circumstances, but not as ultimate truth. They are our lesson for today, if you will.
Yeah.
They're the math problem, metaphysically, that is before us, that as we work our way through it, we get a deeper understanding of principle.
Well said.
Yeah, thank you. Let's go on to number 3, Jeff, mind and metaphysics.
So Fillmore places a great stress on mind, as all metaphysical teachings do. He says to be ignorant of mind and its laws is to be a child playing with fire, or a man manipulating powerful chemicals without knowing their relation to one another. This is universally true, and all who are not learning about mind are in like danger, because all are dealing with the great cause from which spring forth all the conditions that appear in the lives of all men and women. Mind is the one reservoir from which we draw all that we make up into our world, and it is through the laws of mind that we form our lives. Hence, nothing is as important as a knowledge of mind, its inherencies, and the mode of their expression. And he feels that one of the great problems in our society has always been that we haven't given enough attention, both in secular education and in religious education, to metaphysics, to a concept that is not just something that has to be separated because it is, quote, religion. But he says, by this we mean a system by which our children can get an understanding of themselves as whole creatures, spiritual, mental, and physical. He says we're rearing a race who are taught only how to get on in the world materially, and the result is a stimulation of the faculties to gain personal ends. The original fall of man into matter and consequent restricted power was caused by this lack of understanding of the allness of mind and the loss of the sense of innateness. The recovery of this lost power of mind would transform the people of the world.
Oh, boy. Yeah. Now, Fillmore takes the somewhat Gnostic idea that humankind fell into materiality. His belief was that humankind was essentially spiritual in nature. This is a belief that Christian Science has, and that many in the New Thought tradition have. He did not negate the reality of the physical experience, but neither did he call it home, neither did he call it the ultimate truth. And he really did feel that our work was to transcend physicality, but to do it in a way of transforming rather than escaping. Yeah, and the key to this, the passport, if you will, is an understanding of mind, which he felt should be shared with little children. And that's a fascinating idea. Can you teach 5- and 6-year-olds about mind? I've wondered about that, and I remember some of my own thinking back from those days. And I don't know. I think it would be worth a try. I think it would be worth a try. There was I've seen attempts for children like the Little Me and the Greater Than Anything Me. I believe it can be done. Well,
I think it's also important that that Fillmore thought when he said mind, he was not simply talking about our intellect or our thinking faculty.
No.
Which is how it's often misunderstood.
Right.
He actually was talking about an access to our inner divinity.
Right.
And access. How do we learn how to access our inner divinity?
Mm-hmm.
And in that respect, I think young children might have a very easy access.
Well, they've got a lot less to unlearn.
Yeah.
Yeah. What did Mary Baker Eddy say? All is mind in infinite manifestation, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And mind is a synonym for God when it's used that way.
Yeah.
It's a synonym for ultimate reality. It's a synonym for source. And the understanding of it that all really is mind, all is created out of thought energy, that can really be very helpful.
It can, as long as we clearly understand we're not talking about the intellect and mentalness.
And we certainly aren't talking about the brain.
No, we're not.
Yeah. We would say that mind uses the brain, not that mind is the brain.
Correct.
Yeah, mind uses the brain as you and I would use a computer, or as you and I might use an automobile, or even a warehouse to store things in. Well, we've come to the end of our first break already. We've come to our first break already, and it seems like it's so fast. But please, hang on. We've got a lot more to share, and we're willing to share it right after these important messages. Thanks for listening to Discovering Eric Butterworth on Unity Online Radio.
Our goal at Unity Online Radio is to continue expanding our spiritual programming and growing our listening audience. To help us become an ever stronger voice in today's world, we ask for your support. Please visit www.unity.fm and click on Donate Now. Thank you.
Come on out to play.
Heal.
Transform.
Celebrate.
Express yourself.
Add your voice. Come on out in the open for an LGBT experience at Unity Village, September 27th through 30th, 2012.
Be free from judgment.
Be filled with creativity, music, and laughter.
Be yourself, unafraid and living authentically.
Be here for Out in the Open, an LGBT spiritual experience. With me, Reverend Robin Ryder, and author Sal Sapienza, with music by Jack Fowler. September 27th through 30th, 2012 at Unity Village. Learn more at unityvillage.org/LGBT.
I am overflowing with love. I am overflowing with happiness. I am filled with the power to make a change, to create a brand new life. I am overflowing with peace. I'm one with you. You're one with me. Together we are unity.
We now return to Discovering Eric Butterworth with host Tom Thorpe.
Welcome back to Discovering Eric Butterworth on Unity Online Radio. Tom Thorpe and Michael Madej here with you discussing Charles Fillmore and mind power, a subject that is often discussed and just as often misunderstood, both in general and specifically in the way Charles Fillmore explained it. And as Michael and I were discussing on the break, well, tell us what tell the listeners what you said to me, Michael, please.
Well, when I was listening to the audio clips earlier in the week, I just was astounded to realize that I was understanding Mr. Fillmore better than I'd ever understood him before. Like I got a whole new, fresh appreciation for what he actually taught.
So did I, and both of us have been studying Charles Fillmore for more than 30 years.
Yeah.
So I remember our days back in ministerial school. He seemed so wise then. But I offered the observation that Mr. Fillmore not only knew Eric Butterworth not only knew Charles Fillmore's writings, he knew Mr. Fillmore. Yeah. So who better to interpret the man and his work?
And he is, as you said, also the best at interpreting him, we think.
Yeah, the best that I've seen so far.
Me too.
Yeah, and that includes some pretty good efforts at interpretation. Let's go on to number 4, positive thinking.
I think the idea of positive thinking has been in many ways oversimplified, and it has become at times terribly superficial. Fillmore deals with it at a much more deeper level. He quotes often the first chapter of John and the first few lines. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that hath been made. Now he always points out that in the beginning doesn't refer to time. You see, we normally get terribly limited in terms of time-space. And we think about the creation as something that took place way back then. Well, actually, if we get trapped in time, we find that it's very difficult to understand the Scripture, and certainly this mystical concept. The words in the beginning, in the Greek, are in principio, and it was translated in the beginning by translators, and in principio means in principle. It has nothing to do with something way back there. It has to do with a fundamental. In principle was the Word, and the Word was with God, you see, not something way back when. So Fillmore says this statement is of deep metaphysical import, but that, of course, it has been interpreted to mean Jesus Christ, and so it was interpreted to mean that way back in the beginning, Jesus was, you see, and Jesus was with God, and Jesus was God. That's the way the fundamentalist normally deals with it. But he says that we have thus lost the idea of spirit permeating all things, including man. So the Word, according to Fillmore, does not here refer to Jesus, except that Jesus, or any enlightened person, in his totally illumined consciousness, may become, by his own disciplined effort, the Word in expression. Even as if you take a deep insight or truth and work with it to the extent that it is reflected totally in your consciousness and experience, then you're the Word made flesh, you see. But the Word essentially doesn't refer to person, not any person, not even Jesus, but it refers in a sense to the deep fundamental truth, which in this sense is the working power of the infinite process. All things begin in mind, and in divine mind, or the mind of God, there's an idea in back of all things. And this idea contains the force that leads to its total manifestation. So, as Fillmore points out so often, the universe is positive, and the ideas of divine mind are images of positive and creative things. But, as so often happens, these ideas have been frustrated or perverted with the result that they lead to imperfect forms.
They do. And
I've noticed.
My friend Paul Hasselbeck was using the illustration of two people who are dancing with the divine idea of prosperity, and one of them goes on to build a business, and the other goes on to rob a bank. And they both started out in the same place. We have to tell our listeners that in principio isn't Greek, it's Latin. The Greek word is arche. But Eric does this in a number of places. He, like I, probably has spent some time with the Latin Vulgate Bible, and it's really interesting to see how the Latin translates into English. I know a little bit about Latin. I don't know any Greek, but the idea of at the foundation, it begins to make sense because in spirit, we don't talk about time. In infinity, time is not a meaningful concept.
No.
That's real hard to understand, isn't it?
It really is. But it makes a huge difference if we're not talking about some time long ago in the beginning there was but we're really talking about it in principle.
It's not like Star Wars. It's a long time ago in a galaxy far away. No, it's right here and right now. At a different level of understanding. I told my congregation, my community last Sunday, we're living in eternity right now, only we have a hard time seeing it through the eternity lens. Let's continue with number 5, the source of negativity.
So he places a great stress on this thought where it says, without him was not anything made that hath been made. Now, it's a rather confused thought if you look at it carefully. Without him was not anything made that hath been made. Now, of course, this has again been referred to as being Jesus, that nothing was made without him, you see. But this implies that there is a making that is not in accordance with principle inherent in being. And he says there are creations that are not creations at all, but transitory formations that dissolve if and when their mental support is withdrawn. And this is what happens with negative thinking, resulting in sickness and lack and inharmony. But in each case, the results are transitory, so that any experience that is less than right, or less than perfect, or less than harmonious, or less than healthy, is an experience that is a reflection of an imperfect expression of the creative thought, the creative word. And so it is something that is made, but not made by the Word, you see. It's made by the will, by the human consciousness. But the creative Word, this Word in the beginning, the Word in principio, is at the heart of man, always. And if man accepts it and gives expression to it, then he's imbued with power, and he becomes creative. Every person is creative in the use with which he makes of this creative process. Mind functions intuitively, and the person becomes an original thinker when he places a great emphasis upon the creative word at the heart of him. But as Fillmore says, much of our thought is secondary thought, superficial thought, surface thought, thought that is not based upon truth, thought that is simply reactive thought. If you analyze your own thinking process, you will find, as you think about anything, that most of your thought is thought that is based upon a kind of a reflection of human ideals. It is based upon things that you've experienced. It's based upon knowledge that you've heard. It's based upon comparisons out here that have to do with appearances that may or not be true, may or may not be right. But very little of our thought spontaneously is original thought that comes out of the depths of us. And this, to a large extent, comes because of man's tendency to deal with life from the standpoint that he is empty and needs to be filled.
Yeah, all right. And that's a feeling that there just seems to be. I remember once, Michael, looking into the eyes of a baby that was less than 24 hours old. I've never had children of my own, so I've never had that opportunity with my own child. But I look into that child's eyes, and I swear I saw eternity. And I saw ancient wisdom. And then I looked down at this little body, this little vehicle, which this soul was going to have to exert a mighty effort to learn how to use. You know, I really believe that this is one of the reasons why some babies are so fussy, that they're having difficulty getting used to being in a body. And the soul that inhabits that body is not a brand new creation straight from the soul factory. Yeah. But that all of us are as old as time. So original thinking is difficult when you believe that you're an empty vessel needing filling, and when you believe, and many of us are subtly and not so subtly taught, that you don't know much and you've got to be filled. Oh, that's not...
This goes back to the beginning of this program. We were talking about eradicating false conceptions. Well, that's this sense of being an empty vehicle is as false as it gets.
There you go. There you go. And what we're really doing, Eric nails this in the book Discover the Power. It's not get the power put into you. It's discover the power that's already there. Yeah. Discover the wisdom that's already there. Discover the gifts that the divine has created as you.
Discover our true voice. Discover our creative word.
There you go. Well, let's go on to number 6.
At the heart of man, there's never anything less than the perfect man. That's the thing that the human consciousness has been hard to understand. At the heart of man, there is always the Christ. So our whole process of seeking to grow in truth is not to make ourselves into the Christ, or not to build Christ ideas into our consciousness, but to discover the Christ, which is the depth and the reality that is always the truth of us. So, as we've been saying so often recently, that the great purpose is to remember what we've always been. And Jesus later says that He will send the Holy Spirit to bring to your remembrance all things. Not to give you things, not to give you a whole new insight, but to awaken in you the remembering of what you have always been as a spiritual being.
How about that?
That's beautiful.
Yeah, to bring to your remembrance. Is that amazing or what? I think so.
I think so too.
Yeah. Okay, shall we go on? We really have a lot to hear from Eric today, or do we want to talk about this for a minute?
Well, I do think that the concept of remembrance is profound, and to remember and also recognize that which already is so.
Okay.
So that it occurs to me that this is why Mr. Fillmore and Mrs. Fillmore, Myrtle Fillmore, also emphasized going into the silence as much as they did.
Yes, they did.
So that we can directly know.
And the other thing that I think we really need to look at here, it bears repeating, is that this Christ nature is not only for the learned few or the insightful few. It is the truth about everybody, from the apparently biggest dolt on earth to the world's greatest genius or the world's greatest holy person. Mm-hmm. Everyone has the same divine nature, and everyone is able in one way or another to remember it, if you will. Fascinating idea.
It is.
All right. Number 7, Jeff.
In other words, instead of programming the subconscious mind with qualities we want to develop or an image we want to project, the important need is to be still and to listen and to feel that creative word from within and then give voice to it, which is by way of remembering the word which was in the very beginning. Now, this is a very subtle point, and I think it's something that the intellect doesn't grasp immediately. It's something we have to kind of deal with over and over, and we'll be re-emphasizing it because it's a point that Fillmore makes often. Now, as Fillmore says, when man cooperates with principle, he sits on the throne of his authority, and the elemental force is subject to him. When man cooperates with the principle, in thinking, you see, when one deals with the principle that there is a creative word or a creative reality in back of all that which appears in the hour, if we take time to identify with and to feel a sense of oneness with that underlying principle, then our thought has tremendous power. And the words that come out of thought have tremendous energy to create. So, as he says, when you think about anything, there's always a choice, as the Scriptures say, choose you this day whom you will serve, whether to think about it in terms of secondary thought, borrowed thought, or thoughts which you think you should think, or which somebody says you should think, or which are based upon your own experiences, most of which have been incomplete and therefore negative, or whether you're going to think about it in terms of the creative word, in terms of the spiritual reality, which means that always, before we think, we should know, meditate, enter into the silence, or before we think, we should listen. Now, this is very hard to do because most of us have grown up in the kind of the impatient process of thinking impetuously as well as we act impetuously. Thought for most of us is a totally reactive process. We simply think about things rather than learning to think things into expression. This perhaps is the great key that separates the genius from the average person. The genius has confidence in a creative process, and therefore he thinks things into expression. He's an original thinker. First of all, he feels, he gets an idea, he works it out in his own mind, and then he thinks it into expression. But most of us simply use mind as a reflection of what happens out here. In other words, what do I have to think about? Well, what is there? And so we see something and then we react to it. We read something, we react to it. And this is why I think most folks in the study of truth are, as I say so often, overread and underdone.
That was the one that I had to add, yeah. And this clip reminds me of childhood. I don't know if when you went to elementary school, kindergarten, and first grade, you were rewarded for coloring within the lines.
Yeah, I'm sure I was.
I was too. And conformity was, well, in the education system of the time, conformity was a highly prized value. So when you'd get to a course like creative writing in high school, I don't know if some of us had a creative bone left in our bodies. I suppose we did. We just hadn't exercised them in a while because we were so busy gaining approval by doing what we thought ought to be done that we'd forgotten how. Like there's a story in one of our, it's not one of our Unity books, but a book I've often seen about a little boy in school who was drawing a tree. Well, the teacher said, we're going to draw a tree. And he starts to draw a wonderful tree with a purple trunk and orange branches. And the teacher's aghast. That's not a tree, Johnny. Oh, so she teaches him how to draw a tree. And every time he tries something different, she teaches him the proper way to get it done. And finally, he just falls right into line. And he draws a brown trunk and green leaves on every tree. He goes to a new school where the teacher is wanting people to be creative. And she said, now we're going to draw today. And he said, well, what shall we draw? And she said, anything you want. And so he drew a brown tree. He drew, a brown tree with green branches. We get into a place of conformity where we're afraid of our own thoughts, because we think they couldn't possibly have any substance. But Eric Butterworth and Charles Fillmore would both encourage us to explore the wonders of our own mind. Yeah.
And those of us who are very fortunate had teachers who did do that with us.
I had a few.
I had a few as well.
And thank God I did, or I might never have learned to think for myself. I'm still learning to think for myself. And some people might say, you call that thinking? Well, that's another story for another day. Right now, it's time for another break. And thanks for listening to Discovering Eric Butterworth on Unity Online Radio.
You are Unity. We are Unity.
Hello, listeners. Did you know we've gone mobile? That's right. Your favorite Unity Online Radio programs are available on your mobile device. Now you can take us with you wherever you go. Using apps from Live 365 or Stitcher, you can listen to Unity Online Radio live or on demand. To learn more, visit Unity Online Radio and click on Mobile Listening.
How's life working for you? Would it be okay with you if it got easier, simpler, yet more meaningful, more vibrant? Join Reverend Carla McClellan Tuesday afternoons for spiritual coaching, creating a vibrant life. Each week, Carla visits with leading-edge coaches as they explore the sacred purpose and stunning results of this exciting and emerging coaching model. Together, they reveal the secrets and successes of this transformational process. Call in and join the discussion as Carla creates a safe and sacred space to dialogue about real life and real-world transformations. That's spiritual coaching, living a vibrant life with Reverend Carla McClellan. Tuesdays at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on Unity FM, the voice of an awakening world.
Now, Now, back to Discovering Eric Butterworth with Reverend Tom Thorpe.
Welcome back to Discovering Eric Butterworth on Unity Online Radio. Tom Thorpe and Michael Madej here with you, this time talking about Charles Fillmore's concept of mind power and Eric Butterworth's interpretation of it, which we both agree is fantastic. Mm-hmm. And I want to take just a brief moment to say thank you to everyone who's listening, to everyone who tells their friends, downloads podcasts, and, of course, hits that donate button on the www.unityfm homepage as often as they can. You keep this ministry on the air, and you make it possible for us to share our awareness, to share this wonderful material with more and more people all the time. I do thank you. And I also thank Jeff, who keeps us on the air and keeps us sounding great. Thank you, Jeff. Well, let's get right into number 8, Michael, the responsibility of mind.
Okay. Mind runs rampant for most of us when we've never recognized the responsibility of mind. How we think about anything rests on the power to say yes or no. So that, as we say, thinking is not intended simply to react, but rather to creatively deal with it. Things come to us seeming to suggest, I am a problem. So that we often say, boy, this is a tough one. I'm really going to have difficulties with this. And we tend to do that about so many things, even such a simple thing as reading or hearing a report about the weather. Oh, this is going to be a scorcher. So immediately we give that kind of emphasis in the creative process of mind. Rather than letting our thought be creative, you see, the positive mind, the positive thinking mind, as Fillmore deals with it, would say, if you hear a weather report, rather than letting the weather report simply use you, as it were, as a thermometer, so it just tells you you're going to be hot, you let the weather report simply use you in a different way as a barometer. Not as a barometer, as a thermostat, you see. So that the weather report says one thing, but you immediately do something else. So you correspond, as it were, by compensating. And this is something that I think is vital to the whole process of thinking. That if somebody says, I'm sick, you see, or sickness is a contagious thing and everybody's coming down with colds, rather than reacting to this, we, first of all, listen within ourselves and we say what we're listening to. And what we're listening to, you see, is saying that there is only one basis for life, and that is wholeness. And this thing out here has nothing to do with me unless I let it have something to do with me. And again, there are many people today in fields of psychosomatic medicine who say that the only contagion is a contagion of fear, a contagion of the mind. And of course, because our minds are always reacting to things, we read things, we hear things, and there's a lot of hearsay and they say reports, which have a tremendous influence, not only upon what goes on in our mind, but because of the power of mind, by what actually becomes established in our lives, even if we don't want it. And so then we try very hard in this confused process of thought to get rid of something which we've already given the imprint of validity on, because we've accepted it with our thought, rather than developing the process of original thinking or thinking from within out, so that no matter what is heard here, I immediately respond from within in a positive way that doesn't hide the head in the sand, but it regulates and adjusts my life in terms of what is needed to deal with this thing. Again, the illustration of whether my life is simply a thermometer or whether it's a thermostat. And if I think of my reactive process as a thermostat, then you see no matter what the temperature is in terms of the kind of character of consciousness that's prevailing around me, I automatically regulate my whole system and my whole thought process to deal with it creatively.
Thermostats are wonderful things, aren't they?
Well, yes, and this example that he's giving us is so brilliant, and I've never heard it before.
I haven't heard. I've listened to this tape before, but not in a while. When you were a kid, you lived in an area where it snowed a lot, didn't you?
Yes, Michigan.
Okay. Yeah, okay. You had more snow than we did. But back in New Jersey in the 1950s, we would often get a foot of snow at least once or twice during the winter. And my God, did I love that. And I'd hear all these horror stories on the news, but my goodness, I was delighted.
Oh, yeah.
I loved to watch the snow pile up. I wanted to see how far up it would come. And I actually enjoyed shoveling, and I thought it was great exercise, and I'd look back on my work and see a job well done. So whenever there was a snow day, first of all, there'd be no school, and the best thing was when it snowed heavily on Sunday night after I had my homework done. That was a bonanza, I mean to tell you. But other people would look on it with horror, and I know people who, as soon as there's a cloud in the sky, they begin to worry, because worry is what we know how to do.
Yeah. You were a natural-born positive thinker when it came to snow.
Oh, God, yes. I think every kid in my school was. Yeah. All right, let's go on to number 9, denials and affirmations, a really important one.
Human consciousness is made up of a multitude of false personal and race beliefs. And so denial, as Fillmore envisioned it, is the mental process of erasing from consciousness the false beliefs. Clears away belief in evil and limitation and makes the room for truth. But he says if you make denials in a determined and a willful state of mind, then actually you imply the reality of the thing you're trying to deny. So he says, make denials as though you were gently sweeping away cobwebs. In other words, the denial is not a matter of I'm not afraid, I'm not afraid, I'm not afraid, I'm not afraid, because all the while you're doing that, you're saying I'm afraid, and if I say this enough, maybe I won't be. And this is the way denials and affirmations have been misused. The denial is just simply a matter of saying no, that isn't right. Sweep it away. And then say what is right. Affirmation is intended to establish in consciousness a broad understanding of divine principle. It is intended to be original thinking, a positive statement of truth. Actually, it is saying yes to the creative word. We need, as we say, to listen and then say what we're listening to, and that will be the affirmation. But you see, an affirmation is not a pat statement of truth. This is something that's been so taken out of context from Fillmore, because we've, as I so often say jokingly, we've become affirmation happy. Oh, give me an affirmation so I can do this and this and this. And we have books of affirmations, and the affirmation then is all important. An affirmation is not a pat statement, but a creative mind process. So it's not the words, but it's what happens to us when we speak the word, and it is what in us supports the word. If the word is trying to change the condition, as we've said, then what we're saying is the condition needs changing. So my emphasis is upon the negative condition. So an affirmation often implies a negative condition, and therefore it supports it. If you keep affirming the truth of health over and over and over again with the thought in mind that if I say it enough it'll be true, then what you're saying to yourself is it isn't true. You see. So even though you're speaking this affirmation, this statement of truth, or this beautiful treatment that you have, you're saying it on the basis that I'm trying to change lies into truth. But if you start out with lies and try to change them into truth, you're giving validity to lies, and the lie is the thing that is emphasized in your consciousness. So the affirmation does not make healing or understanding, but the affirmation is simply intended to bring the mind into a right attitude or a position of consciousness so that it can allow the flow of the creative process to work.
I'm going to save that article and use it the next time I have to teach denial and affirmation.
Yeah.
He does a better job in a little bit over 3 minutes than I've seen people do in a long time. We don't really have time for number 10, so we're going to need to go right on to number 11, which gives us a new way of looking at things.
Charles Fillmore says we can see the necessity of law and order according to spirit. If we would demonstrate health, every negative or destructive thought should be kept out of our mental atmosphere even more carefully than harmful elements are kept out of our material food. That we work to deal in consciousness to actually screen out the negative reactions. Not to say the conditions don't exist, but to make mighty sure of what exists in our consciousness, because what exists in our consciousness is going to be reproduced constantly in our own lives. So that always, again, recognizing that subconscious mind is a vital area of creative activity, that always, when we deal with a thing consciously, that we take a moment to deal with it superconsciously, to turn within, and to let the inner voice, like the one little person used to say, I always go in and see what the Father has to say to me first. You know, if you say it that simply, fine. But even if it's just a matter of developing the tendency of saying, now that's what the world says, but what do I say? And what I say is going to depend on whether I'm giving validity to this out here or whether I'm saying that the real power, the power to change, the power to influence my life and the world around me, the power to keep me a creative being rather than just a non-thinking, reactive response to what goes on out here, all this is within me in the superconsciousness of my mind. So I always take time to be still. I may not always be able to do it along life's way, but when that happens, when I have too much accumulation of negative things out here, then occasionally I take time. Whether it's at the office, at my desk, or in my home, I sit down every once in a while, I turn it all off and turn within myself. As Jesus says, enter into the inner chamber and close the door and pray to the Father in secret. Not pray about things, not analyze all these things in here, but shut it all out and know reality, know oneness with power. And then go back and deal with these things. Not run away from them, deal with them, but think creatively. Say what you're listening to, and then act upon what you're saying, which is a response of what you're listening to. Then you become a vital power. Even if you're a politician, even if you're involved in areas where you have to deal with these things, you will deal with them at the highest possible level of your own thought process. You'll be effective then, rather than simply be one who goes around stirring up all the problems, thinking you're helping them.
Have you ever done something where you were so afraid that you wouldn't be able to do it that you became the victim of your own fear?
I think that's true. I think I have.
Yeah, I certainly have too. And there have been other times, a couple that I can remember, where I didn't know that I could do it, but I did know that I needed to because there was no one else around who could do it. And I reasoned, my first talk was for this reason. I didn't think I was equipped to give a talk, but my minister did. And that was my reasoning. He saw something in me, so it must be there.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. When we take the time first to realize where we're thinking from, we could ask, who's your daddy, you know? Is the fear your daddy,
sure.
or what's going on here?
And again, this is an argument for having a very active prayer or meditation life.
Mm-hmm.
Because going to Source is not just...
Oh dear!
It's not just something that's pleasant or fun. It's actually necessary for our creativity and our productivity.
It certainly is. It's absolutely necessary. And the few moments we take to go within and reconnect with what we truly are, those few moments can save us sometimes hours. Or sometimes make a job possible that didn't seem like it was going to be possible.
People say we don't have time to pray. We actually don't have time not to pray.
Exactly. So often, if we just dive right into the doing, we end up making such a botch of the thing that we have to take it apart and start over. It's a lesson that I suppose we humans need to learn by experience.
Yeah.
And that's the one thing that we want to look at. Charles Fillmore, I believe we said this last week, made his own life a laboratory. Mm-hmm. Everything he taught to anyone else, you could be sure that he had proved it in his own life first. He'd worked with it. He'd spent time in the silence with it.
Sure.
Yeah, and this was terribly important to him.
And as we said earlier in this program, truth is about proving it now.
Exactly. If you couldn't prove it, then you didn't have the right to call it truth. And that is why, again, he spent such a long time between the beginning of the movement and the publication of his first book, Christian Healing. Yeah. He had a lot to prove.
Yeah.
Well, this has been exciting, and thank you for choosing such excellent excerpts. And I'll look forward to next week where we go on to the next thrilling chapter.
Me too.
Until then, to everyone listening, whenever you're listening, wherever you're listening, namaskar.
I'm one with you. You're one with me. Together.
Thank you for tuning in to Discovering Eric Butterworth with Reverend Tom Thorpe. Join us every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Central Time for more insights into Eric Butterworth's powerful truth message and how you can apply it to your life today. This program is brought to you in part by Unity Institute Spiritual Education and Enrichment. Make SEE your gateway to spiritual enlightenment. Online at www.unity.org/education/SEE. Discovering Eric Butterworth, only on Unity FM, the voice of an awakening world.
I'm one with you. You're one with me. Together we are unity.
Things may happen around you. Things may happen to you. But the only things that really count are the things that happen in you.
This meditative moment from Reverend Eric Butterworth is brought to you by Unity.
Have you ever considered that everything you think and say is a prayer to the universe? Are you sending a positive or negative message? Join Reverend Beverly Molander and her guest on Affirmative Prayer, Activating the Power of Yes, to find out how you can activate your own power of yes. Using affirmative prayer, or positive intention, can make a big difference in the way you think, feel, and live. If you want help moving from chaos to clarity in relationships, health, prosperity, or work, this is the place for you. We'll have some how-to suggestions about how you can say yes more often from this point forward. Talk with Beverly Molander and her guest live every Monday at noon Central or 1 p.m. Eastern. Affirmative Prayer, Activating the Power of Yes. Only on Unity Online Radio, the voice of an awakening world.
Hello, listeners. Did you know we've gone mobile? That's right. Your favorite Unity online radio programs are available on your mobile device. Now you can take us with you wherever you go. Using apps from Live 365 or Stitcher, you can listen to Unity online radio live or on demand. To learn more, visit www.unity.fm and click on mobile listening.